In this segment, we're going to talk some about the history of the jazz trumpet and some of the players that, well, the ones that I've admired. Because when I was a kid, I read an article in an old Metronome magazine by Buck Clayton, and the interviewer asked him if he had any advice for young people who wanted to be jazz players. Buck's advice was to listen as much as you can and steal all that you can. And by stealing, he means pay attention. If you like it, write it down, try to copy it, make it part of you. You're never going to play it like the original guy, and eventually it's going to become part of your language. Jazz is an oral music. It means that the history goes on basically without writing it down. We use our ears. So use yours and steal the things you like. There was a guy by the name of Jabbo Smith who recorded in the 20s and had a long career. I actually met him. He played well into the 70s. He had a remarkable control of the instrument. He would play from the bottom to the top, very fast and lovely lines, and he was actually sort of before Louis, the great trumpet player. He might have done something like this. He was all over the place. His flexibility was always something I admired and wanted to do. But then we come to the guy who, as far as I'm concerned, invented our language. His name was Louis Armstrong. I don't think you'll find a trumpet player in the world today who doesn't admit to owing Louis something. He sort of invented our language. Louis was very dramatic and fiery. He had a wonderful particular way of placing quarter notes so that you knew just where the time was. Something like... Everything sounded like a composition. You never heard any hesitancy in his playing. He would start a solo and finish it just as though it had been written. It's amazing. Get some Louis Armstrong records and listen. One of the greatest examples is the short cadenza that he played in front of a tune called West End Blues, and it's still available now. Dramatic stuff. Now, while Louis was dramatic, there was a guy playing at the same time by the name of Bix Beiderbecke, and he was the poet. He, instead of having that really dramatic way of phrasing, he had a really soft and sweet way of phrasing things. Instead of that sharp eighth note, a quarter note attack, he had sort of a rolling eighth note, kind of like this. And he had a lovely sort of sweet approach to the harmony, like he was telling you a story. Big fat sound. Now, between the two of these guys, Bix Beiderbecke and Louis Armstrong, there were a lot of people that were influenced by them both. A guy by the name of Billy Butterfield, who was a wonderful trumpet player, could do anything. Billy was one of the few trumpet players who could play with Toscanini in the NBC Symphony. He played lead trumpet, first trumpet, with Artie Shaw's band, and he played small band jazz. He was pretty incredible. He had lovely octave slurs, sort of like this. Billy was a great player, and one of my particular favorites was a guy by the name of Bobby Hackett. Again, that lovely rolling eighth note. Then it carries on to people like Ruby Braff. And one of the things Ruby personifies to me is something I didn't mention when I was talking about Louis earlier. The trumpet is a very powerful instrument, and especially in bands like Dixieland bands, we are the lead voice. We can generally direct the band with our trumpet. Louis did it, and Ruby Braff did it. It's where you leave those holes. You can go, and the trombone player and the clarinet player and everybody else in the band has to fill in that hole before you go. You have the melody and you have the power. That's what the trumpet does. So if you listen to Ruby Braff and Louis Armstrong, listen to how they direct the band from the way they play. Again, influenced by all those guys were people like Charlie Shavers. Every time I heard Charlie Shavers play, I knew that he had studied the Arbin book and stuff. He became very famous for a tight cup mute sound and played with a band called the John Kirby Band. And Charlie always had a great control of the instrument, but he always sounded like he'd really studied all the literature. Charlie was a wonderful player. You should listen to him. Now, there was another guy by the name of Harry James. Harry had a particular style. He was a sweet lead trumpet player. He had a very full sound. By lead, he played melody most of the time. And he had a wonderful vibrato that's very distinctive. You should really listen to a lot of those guys. Listen for the vibrato, listen for how they place the notes and the kinds of thoughts that they play. There were four guys with the Basie band that I always loved. There was Sweets Edison, Buck Clayton, Snooky Young, and Clark Terry. They all had unique voices, and they all pretty much invented themselves. Sweets was famous for the harmon mute, and he used to play, his signature would be like 6 quarter notes. Buck Clayton had a very unique sound and a very unique approach to the instrument. He put, like all the Basie guys, a lot of emphasis on time in that quarter note. Buck would play. Those sorts of things, those stresses and all of that, you can do if you practice. Steal them. Listen to those Buck Clayton records and try and sound just like them. You'll get close. Snooky Young was the lead player with the Basie band. And playing lead trumpet in a big band and playing in a small band are two really different things. A lead trumpet player has to be very strong and very consistent. You have to play everything the same way every night. And I was lucky enough to play with Snooky 2 or 3 times in my life. And it was an amazing experience. He just had absolute control of the music he was playing. And finally, the guy who still amazes thousands of people every day of the year is Clark Terry. Clark, you know, has studied this instrument. He's eaten it up. He knows it all. He does things with lip trills like this. And then he'll play repetitious phrases like this. Clark Terry is a wonderful player, still with us and well worth listening to and stealing all you can. You'll have to be a great player to steal from Clark Terry. When I first started to work in New York, I was lucky enough to work with a gentleman by the name of Roy Eldridge, who was in fact one of the most fiery, consistently new and creative musicians I'd ever worked with. Roy Eldridge was a wonder. I cannot do his sound, but it was as though to me the sound came out of his bell as if it were spinning. And he did everything. I worked alongside him for 3 or 4 years, saw him every night. And every night was a new thing. He was that creative. Every instrument, every time he picked it up, every tune he played was creative. Now we come to 2 guys who